Hi, this is Dr. Emma Offord, host of This Voice is Mine, the Unquiet Podcast. For every neurodivergent mind that was masked, misread or missed, where identity is reclaimed and the system gets named, This Voice is Mine is a podcast for those who were told they were too much, too sensitive, too chaotic, too intense or not enough. Hosted by myself, Dr. Emma Offord, a clinical psychologist, neurodivergent woman and unapologetic system disruptor. This podcast explores what happens when difference is pathologized and what becomes possible when we drop the shame, the script and the medical model. Through stories, reflections and conversations with people who were never meant to fit, This Voice is Mine reclaims the truth of neurodivergent minds, bodies and ways of being. This is not about fixing or fitting in. It's about remembering who we are and unlearning everything they got wrong. In this, our very first episode of This Voice is Mine podcast, I'm joined by the brilliant Eliza Fricker, author, illustrator, and one of the most insightful advocates in the PDA and autism space. You might know Eliza from her Sunday Times best-selling book, Can't Not Won't, or her deeply honest and beautiful memoir, Thumbsucker, where she explores her own story with humour, tenderness and truth. Through her Missing the Mark blog and illustrations, Eliza has created a space where so many parents, educators and neurodivergent people feel truly seen. Our conversation was open, funny and profoundly validating, full of moments of recognition and laughter, a deep dive into what it really means to navigate the system while honouring difference. I think you'll love how Eliza brings compassion and clarity to subjects that often feel messy or misunderstood, and the way she invites us all to see difference, not as deficit, but as truth. I guess the concept of what I'm really trying to do here is about unspoken voices, which you and I have had.
Yeah.
And here we are speaking, and, being heard and being listened to and finding our voice, and other people enjoying our voice and finding their voice from that. So, really what I want to talk about is that partly that journey of, how we grow full size, how we come to, completely change really how we've been living our life. And I think there's something really important about understanding that journey as well as the destination of where we are right now. So before we begin, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you?
Sure. My name's Eliza Fricker. I'm an author, illustrator, mother.
Yeah.
And I probably was most known for writing Can't Not Won't, which was Sunday Times bestseller. But I've been writing under the name Missing the Mark for quite a few years. So that's a combination of text and drawing, of experiences of trying to navigate the school system as a parent with a child who's neurodivergent. And as that's gone on, it's become kind of more multi-layered, I suppose. And it's become, experiences of motherhood and parenting, but also neurodivergence as a bigger thing. Because I think for families, it's often our child that's diagnosed first, and then what follows is our own diagnosis. So it's kind of evolved and got bigger over time, I suppose.
And there's the work that you've named there, and what I see a lot of as well is the workshops that you hold and the webinars, the advocacy, the kind of spreading, the message about neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So, you have such a variety of things that you're involved in. Why don't we start with, where did this all begin? Are you able to locate where that was?
Yeah, I can absolutely locate it, because it was my daughter being at home. So my daughter had had a breakdown from school, and I found myself at home, and that was quite a final line. I think I tried to kind of continue my own work as a designer and illustrator up until that point, but it was a really kind of flailing and trying to kind of hold on to some of that work. I wasn't really able to do it anymore because my daughter was really struggling in school. But that final moment of her then not being in school and being at home, I even remember just sitting there and looking out, and we were in a flat sort of quite high up at the time, looking at the rooftops and drawing that. And then thinking I'm going to just keep drawing. I remember this sort of sense of the world had sort of ended for us, and I had to kind of keep going in some capacity.
Yeah.
And so the drawing was sort of the keep going, if you like. And then I started drawing from baby photos of her, and then writing over the top, which actually did end up in Can't Not Won't, writing over the top things that people had said about my parenting and me as a mother, the kind of outsiders, and drawing those over the baby photos, really. And then it sort of carried on. I started drawing people I'd met, and I kind of was drawing them with humour. So some of the professionals we'd met, I was kind of drawing them in a very... Those haven't made it into the public realm, by the way. But as it went on and on, I was realising it was so cathartic for me. Yeah. And I felt that all those emails I sort of was sending to professionals at that time, and that outrage I felt was just going nowhere, and was actually really exposing for me and for us as a family. So being able to use the things that have always been powerful for me, such as wit, was really good to put that out there, drawing these experiences and getting a bit of power back through doing that. Yeah. And I had sat there sort of previously during those years and sat in those meetings and thought, I'm going to draw this one day because this is absolutely ridiculous. It gets that kind of, I don't know if you've had that, but when things are sort of so ghastly and bad, they almost become quite surreal.
I was just thinking that you've got nothing to lose, because it's almost, like you say, it feels like a complete devastation. Life's gone nuclear. There's no real going back, and so you don't have anything to lose. And it kind of gives you that sense of agency of, well, I might as well, have a go at this. I might as well say this. Like the mask, it gets ripped off. It doesn't come off gently. And I often talk about it. The words I use are positive disintegration. It's like, it feels as though, the stability of what we've been standing on, even though it might have been things that were uncomfortable for us, and we, given a different life or environment or people's attitudes, we could have had a different way of doing things, but that is just taken away, and we have to do so much rebuilding about our identity, where we're going next, how we're gonna do this. And like, I'm hearing you talk about that. So you're a mum, you've got people, it sounds like, criticizing or judging or not understanding and invalidating that whole experience. So you've not got the support, you haven't got the scaffolding, and you're there trying to work out what next. Like, how do you raise your daughter? How does she get an education? How do you work? And how do you have a voice as well? So you started to do this through these illustrations. Yeah. And the words were coming forward. Then what did you do? Like, where did you take it next?
I met up with a friend of mine who's also an editor, and we met up, and she said, well, I don't know anything about this because I haven't got kids, but I reckon it'd be like quite interesting for some people. And I was like, I don't know if it would be, because no one through those years of me experiencing it seemed to get it. I felt really isolated with it. So I was like, I don't think other people are going to be into this, or it's not going to resonate. She was like, well, why don't you just put a blog out there, just make a little WordPressy thing and put it out there. And so that's what I did. And then I think I linked it onto Twitter, and then immediately there was this sort of feedback from it. And actually, I think one of the earliest ones was a psychologist working in like Camden Council, and she was like, oh, I've shown this to my team. And so I think it was something probably that was, obviously we know is there and very prevalent, but I think even with professionals, they're quite trapped by this stuff too. And I think it resonated with them as well, that they feel like often they're offering this kind of tick box solution for families, and they're not feeling like it's enough, or they're coming away from that feeling that they've let people down. So it kind of started to resonate on a few levels.
Yeah, until that moment where it started to resonate with others, you talk about feeling quite isolated, that your voice, you were speaking up, you were, I'm assuming, speaking to the school, speaking to other professionals on behalf of your daughter, maybe friends and family as well, and your voice wasn't being heard in all of that, or your daughter's?
No, it's a strange position to be in, and I suppose that's that those early feelings of experiences for myself. I now can look at this like this. This wasn't something at the time I realised, but I suppose what was happening was I was feeling those feelings I used to feel, those feelings of being misunderstood were coming back into it. I certainly found going into those environments as well, like deeply distressing and stressful, because what I had done for myself is moved very much away from those environments with strip lighting and lanyards and plastic chairs, and thought I'm never returning to these. And then obviously you have a child and you've got to go back into those and into these settings that are stacked with hierarchy. And I felt deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And I didn't feel that any of it kind of was reflective either of the world that I was trying to build, I suppose, away from those environments.
And you mentioned earlier, and I know this is what many late identified neurodivergent people talk about, is finding their neurodivergence via, maybe their child's identification, or when things start to go wrong for the child. Usually it's in school. And so there's that reliving, and you're reliving, like you mentioned, what it might have felt for you at times being in those environments like school. And then as an adult, you're having to go in and advocate for your daughter, and having a reliving experience of people invalidating, or, you're having to go through that a second time. I mean, but you're doing this for your child as well. So there's, the consequences are very, very important, aren't they?
Yeah, it's quite a complex one, that one, because I think I had certainly thought I had really covered my tracks with my masking by becoming a wife and a mother.
Yeah.
And this felt like I had muffed that up badly. I'd mucked this up because now my child was struggling with school. As a parent, one of the main things you do, apart from get them to eat their vegetables and minimise screen time, is you get them to school.
Yeah.
So the fact that I wasn't doing that felt like almost that mask was slipping off and revealing something potentially. So that was a very complex and quite troubling time on many levels.
I can imagine. And when I hear people talk about that kind of complexity and that experience, I'm always taken back to school and how they often say school is safe. That phrase is used so often, that it's a place of safety. I know when children have had absences from school, parents have been called and they've been told, we need your child in school to keep them safe. There's such a narrative about safety in school. It's so strong that when you try to expose how it's not safe for everybody, how it wasn't safe maybe for yourself, that there's an enormity there, isn't there, about this huge dominant narrative that most people believe is true and accurate. It's bigger than the situation that you're experiencing as a mum. It's this whole systemic situation, isn't it?
And you're trying to take it on as a parent.
While reliving trauma and going into the environments that are traumatizing. And I also think about that sensory level. Like for me, going into environments, even though it might be a different school, say a different hospital or a different institution to one I might have had my experience in, they have a smell, they have a certain way of how things are lit. They have an energy, a sensory energy. So like in my body, even if my head is feeling very strong about what I'm going to say and do, my whole body's also having a sensory assault and reliving things. So I'm also imagining you going into those environments and on a physical level as well, having your nervous system have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's utterly exhausting. And then you're on top of that dealing with a child who is in deep distress most days because of the impact of that environment. So you're also having to do a lot of parenting on top of your own self feeling quite, broken.
Absolutely.
I just remember fawning massively.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in those meetings and just being the most amenable, nice, smiling, manically smiling. I think I've drawn quite a few of myself manically smiling, just to get out. And that was my way of like, this is so uncomfortable for me. I need to get out of here. And the way to get out is just be as pleasant and nice as I could. And I used to come out of there and not remember anything.
Yeah. So dissociating. And this is what people, they see the observable parts, don't they?
Yeah.
They see the smile. They see the compliance. They think it's sorted.
Yeah.
And they don't realise that actually you're in a survival response. And this is what, when I do my work and I try to say to schools, there is a thing called school trauma. Children are not all safe in school, and school is traumatising for them for these various different reasons. And they are often, what is said back to me is that doesn't exist. We can talk about that another time, but it's rejected. So that voice I have with my training and my, trauma training and experience is outright rejected. And I often think about those who haven't had that training, who can't go in and say, as a psychologist, and say, I've got trauma training, so I know what I'm talking about. You're having to learn about all of this, and maybe you don't even know you're in a survival response. Did you at the time?
No, not at that time, because I had no awareness. I say I had no awareness. This is a strange thing. I probably had an awareness that I was trying to cover up. I remember that. I got to keep covering up.
Yeah.
Whether I had that thoughts about neurodivergence, and I'm not so sure. But there wasn't really an awful lot of that masking was something that had kicked in for many years and been a learned response to difficult environments.
And what I think is really interesting about your story and what you were talking about is how it feels like with your illustrations, with the writing you were doing, there was this unquiet part of you that was like, I'm not masking. It was really trying to come to the surface. Maybe it couldn't in the meeting with the principal or whoever it was that you were with, or with the professionals, but it found its way, didn't it? It started to find its way. And you were still in disbelief because you were saying, when someone suggested you do a blog, and who's going to listen to this? But it's interesting to me to think that there's this part that's trying to find voice, trying to find a way out of the masking and the situation. So as this progresses, as you do your blog and you're getting people starting to be curious, how does your voice then begin to grow further?
I was going to say, actually, initially with that, as you were talking, something that I was thinking about is that I used to send, so after those meetings of fawning, I would send emails that were much more, I would say, myself, where I was kind of upset, annoyed. And then that would be met with confusion, obviously, because in that meeting I'd been incredibly pleasant and amenable. So why was I now kind of pushing back on that? Yeah. And again, that's a pattern through my life of people going, hang on, you said you were fine. Why are you not fine? Confusion around that. And then I think as I was drawing, it was me obviously saying, well, actually, this is how it was for me. Mm-hmm. But even doing the drawing, I would say up until not that long ago, there was part of me that thought that someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, why have you done all this? This isn't true. Mm-hmm. That's how little, I think, as neurodivergent people, we believe our own selves in this.
Yeah.
And I thought that for a very long time, that someone was going to pull me up. And I think part of that was why I initially called it Missing the Mark as well, because it took it out of it being me in a way.
Yeah. When you're describing that, I'm traveling a little bit to my own experiences, not a particular one, but just the feeling that I had then was, yes, I've always got that sense that someone's going to come along and tell me off, tell me it's rubbish. It's a feeling of shame. And so when you were talking, I was feeling that rising in me, that's the experience I have behind the masking. For me, it's often, I'm going to be shamed. And I have been shamed. And I wonder if that's been an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And only last week, I've been doing somatic experiencing. And we were doing that. We were dealing with those emotions of shame and early memories around that. And so I've now given it a colour and a shape.
Oh, are we allowed to know?
Well, it turned out it was oval and red, but it's sort of, part of that work that I've been doing since is to really kind of work out what those feelings were and where they've come from and how it all began really with that stuff. And
I think this is such an important point because to me there is something called neurodivergent-specific trauma. So we have, as a society, a level of understanding about trauma. We could say somebody being in a car crash and being badly injured. Most people can relate to that and say, I can see how that would be traumatizing for that person. But if we talk about school and if we talk about the lived experience of being a neurodivergent person, trauma isn't necessarily understood because, well, which event led to that? And the answer is hundreds of thousands. That to you would be,
how long have you got?
To another person, but that's just going to school. That's just stepping outside. That's just somebody disagreeing with you. Believe me, it isn't. And so when you're talking about trying to identify, I think we do have to think in terms of shape and somatic experience because it is almost impossible to name all the events or even remember them because we become disembodied from them. We don't know that they're neurodivergent traumatic events. They become our weirdness or why can't I just do this? They get the internalized rejection. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something that I try and convey a lot in my work as well around how our children are perceived in this. And it's approached as a solution focused thing, isn't it? And that's never going to work. No. It's the idea is there's something there specific and then that can be fixed and then we can be moved along and off we go. And I think that is still under the assumption that environment, school, is a benign one and that it is something that this autistic child is grumbling about, such as the lighting, so we can give them sunglasses, or we'll get dimmer switches, or it's too loud, so we'll get them some headphones. And I think I had an early sense with this stuff, obviously because I was neurodivergent myself, where I was pushing back on that, and I was like, it's not that simple.
No.
But I couldn't obviously articulate that at the time, and I would probably still really struggle, to be honest, too. I mean, I don't know if you find that in your job, but going into schools, I would probably still find that difficult with those people to be able to articulate that, because something that I still do find difficult is often talking to people when there's one, an obvious hierarchy, but two, when and this is again trauma, I'm hypervigilant to assessing people and seeing if they are going to be amenable and open to what I'm saying, and I'm very good at detecting when they're not quite early on, and then I get into a whole heap of kind of stumbling over my words, and I'm not able to kind of articulate things or be as lucid because I'm just aware that they're not going to be hearing me.
Yeah, and that neurocepting, picking up the energy, picking up, that sense of threat that you aren't going to be listening, because that's also perhaps a neurodivergent trait in your nervous system, in your neurobiology, but it's also part of the trauma response. It's what we become hypervigilant to, reading the room and reading people, knowing when we can say what we really think and feel, and we absolutely when we can't.
And I'm very different in that. When I really can struggle to communicate when it's someone who I feel isn't going to get me or isn't going to be on board. My language can get really clunky, and I'm not articulate in those when I'm in those places.
And you asked me how maybe I experienced that, and so in the development of my career, where I've been more creative and chosen my own path and decided I want to do things this way, and if people gravitate to me, then that's wonderful, because it's in alignment with what they need. I have said so much more about what I think and what I believe, and it has felt threatening and it has felt deeply uncomfortable, but it has been so empowering as well at the same time, and that part is growing and growing and growing for me. I take great satisfaction now in correcting people, whereas before I would have felt the heavy shame. It would have shut me down. Physiologically, I wouldn't have been able to, like you say, articulate, because I would have felt so under threat relationally, so under threat, because I think that's one of the strongest neurodivergent experiences, especially late identified, is the relational trauma, where you're trying to stay safe in relationship, to systems, to individuals, and that's where that masking and the fawning and everything else comes into operation, doesn't it? You and I have talked here and there outside of this podcast, haven't we? And we've started to open up conversations about relationships, and I think you and I were just kind of playing with lots of different kind of ideas about the neurodivergent experience in relation to the world, to systems, to ourselves, and to other people. And I wanted to ask you, I guess, kind of openly about some of your thoughts to do with that, but also to think about, how do we, or how have you, worked through some of that relational trauma and sense of threat to find this voice that you're growing and developing? Are there things that you can name or describe to us that would help us understand, the safety maybe that you've begun to develop, to be able to have that voice?
I think through doing the work that I've been doing, I've met so many people, and that's other mothers, parents, but that's also professionals, where we have these really alive, connecting conversations, and we can talk really honestly. And I think it works in a really reciprocal way, where we're sort of opening up with each other, and it feels really safe to do that.
Yeah.
And often with the webinars that I do, it's almost like saying that stuff for others, so that it then welcomes them into that space to be able to say it too. And I just feel that, even though obviously I don't get to meet everyone, but it is a sort of community feel to that. It's very much all of us kind of being able to get louder.
Yeah.
And with an ease as well that I don't think I've had previously. And I've had obviously good friendships over the years, but this is very different. These are very specific experiences that we are sharing with each other, and being able to be open. And even when I speak to do the kind of one-on-ones with family, they're so enriching to speak to people. I spoke to someone recently, and they were quite upset, talking about their own neurodivergence, and saying that, they're worried about, the trauma element, and did they create the trauma? And, we can really thrash these things out together, and it's a lovely thing to be able to do. And they come back and we chat more, and it's just creating those safe spaces, really.
It really is. And, what so many people say to me when they feel safe enough to start to describe some of their experiences, and I can validate, I can relate, or I can explain some of that, whatever, however our conversation goes, I literally see people's shoulders drop, and the words are often, I didn't know anyone else was experiencing that. There's so much that is held and contained, and so just by knowing someone else is having that experience or has had it, just brings that sense of safety. So, for me, those voices are so important. No, we don't always get to meet every single person who might hear us, but the fact that they hear us, and that is opening something up in them, that they can relate and start to feel a sense of safety. That's a pretty incredible thing.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I think I kind of, obviously being a visual communicator, I see us all with these thick masks that are thick as walls around us. And then here we are kind of interacting and breaking those down with each other. And, when we do those webinars, I mean, part of starting those parenting webinars was because I was given these courses to go on as a parent, and I thought these are rubbish and they're not resonating at all or getting anywhere near the nuts and bolts of things. As neurodivergent people, we want the real truth and honesty, don't we? We want to feel it through us, and these things were just a PowerPoint and awful clip art pictures. And doing these parenting webinars, it was, we were saying the real stuff, about, parenting is really hard and you get really frustrated and you lose your rag and, all the things that we need to be able to say this stuff out loud to, I think, particularly when we've built up these walls of perfectionism as we have as women. And, and I have to say it is mainly women in this space still. I'm putting that one out there.
It's quite a dominant voice, which is good, which is nice to hear. But when I remember when I was kind of beginning Divergent Life and describing neuroaffirming practice, which stepped way outside of more traditional psychological therapy and ways of doing things, and almost people being worried about me, kind of like, should you be doing that? And like, why would you do that? And I don't understand what you're doing. What's the point? And I'd explain. And for me, and maybe you've experienced some of this, and it takes me back to what you were saying about as a mum going into the school, that you do it anyway against this, tsunami of like pushback. And, and you are on your own doing it. And you keep going and you keep going, and then people start to hear, and then you see the difference it's making, and then this beautiful momentum starts to gather. Do you still experience that kind of pushback when you are voicing?
Not so much, although I have heard sort of people I know who've worked in sort of more local authority, they get a bit grumpy sometimes with my stuff, which I revel in, I have to say. I was chatting to my dad about it actually, because he was a political cartoonist, and we were talking about how he said no one in a grey suit's going to understand satire, are they? It's, because it's obviously gets people's backs up, that and I guess you're doing something right if it's making people sit up and think and get a bit grumpy occasionally. That's the beginnings, isn't it? With I mean, sometimes what happens is I do get people asking me into a space, and I have to think about that sometimes, because sometimes they want to put my name in that space to say they've used me in that space, but then they're not really using me appropriately in that space. And actually I had to pull out of something not that long ago. They wanted to edit what I said, so they said that they didn't want me to talk about failing my maths GCSE to this group of autistic students, because they said it might, encourage them to fail their maths GCSE, and they want everyone to try their best. So could I say, can you try your best? And I had to pull out of it. I thought this isn't okay. Here I am finally finding my voice. And I'm being asked to shut it down. And, I'm certainly not going to make people fail their GCSEs because I said that I didn't like something. It might validate and make people feel more comfortable, but it's not going to make someone not do something.
And I can feel my fight response kick in, hearing that, because I want to say something that we might have to edit it out. But it's just that kind of ridiculousness that exists in this world where things are sanitized, and this kind of strange... like it's making what you're saying apparently not safe, and that you're going to have that kind of influence, when it's quite the opposite, actually. And that's what I find really hard, is where what other people are saying makes no sense. The shutting down of what would actually reach out to people, probably help them pass or encourage them around their GCSEs. But there's this strange dynamic of something like that being actually labelled as unsafe. I have felt in my career when I've spoken up and said, I don't agree with that, I'm not going to do that, I think we should do it this way. Think people have used these words, but they've definitely given me, it's through their eyes and their expression, risky and irresponsible. That's how I've been made to feel, because I'm stepping out of the order, I'm suggesting something different, I'm causing extra, I'm being too much.
Yeah.
Can't you just leave it all be, Emma?
I mean, and that hits something, doesn't it? The too much.
Yeah.
You're being too much.
I remember it was the first week, I think it might have been the first lecture of me studying to be a psychologist, big cohort of 40 of us. And the first lecture, I just thought, I don't really get this. And I put a question. And I'm not kidding, pretty much all 40 faces turned around and looked at me. And the look was of, really? Like, how rude are you? So rude was another one, is another one. Like, to ask a question, to challenge, is rude and unkind. So, yeah. So finding voice is quite hard.
Finding voice. And it's interesting how a lot of these systems don't like the validating voice. They see the validating voice is the compounding the issue voice, and they get it completely wrong. That's not what we're doing at all.
Yeah. That you're causing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also making me think of sometimes it can be quite simple, that things are getting very overcomplicated in these systems. And that I think what neurodivergent, not all, because we're all different, but some neurodivergent people are very good at calling out the simple.
Yeah. We're brilliant at that.
And I've talked about this before, but I'll share it with you because I don't think I've said it to you. But I spoke to the school because a child was, the teachers were telling their parents, like, your child's falling asleep at school, worried about the child's safety. So we dug a bit deeper. It was, well, what lessons? Is it every single lesson? No, just English. What's being learned in English? Shakespeare. Okay. Does the child enjoy Shakespeare? Don't think so. Okay, there you go. And anywhere else, assembly. Do you think that child's not interested and is just literally falling asleep from boredom? Oh, and hadn't thought about it like that. Assumed that the parents weren't looking after the child and you know, I don't know what, the child wasn't getting sleep. And my advice was, why don't you just let the child sleep? So, you know, called out a really simple, but they were like, no, we need to speak to the parents, we need to speak to the GP, like really overcomplicating. What I think is true is that the child was just interest-based driven, and this was just not an interesting situation. And they just went to sleep to survive it. And that's okay. Just let them sleep.
And their minds were blown.
They were, honestly, it was like speechless. So yeah, I think there can be something really interesting about just, you know, uncomplicating something like that. But it's not, I don't think it's received. It's, you know, how can you just let a child sleep in that situation? It's too many rules. Say no, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so something else I wanted to ask you was, you have these many hats. I call you almost like a hybrid professional in terms of your morphing and shifting and being able to do so many different things with a, you know, a common thread of talking about neurodivergence and, you know, being an advocate. How, as a neurodivergent person, is it for you to kind of show up and to be pulled in all those different directions? Because some people would kind of find that a real struggle. So, you know, having your voice does, I guess, require you being pulled in different directions.
I need it for my energy levels. I need the variant. I get really bored otherwise. So I need that quiet time with the radio on, drawing. Then I need to go and take the washing out of the machine, then I need to go back and do something else, like a couple of consults.
Yeah.
Then I need to go off and take the dog for a walk and zone out. And then I need different energy through the day, and my work provides me with that. You know, it's always, there's always variables to it. It's always changing.
Yeah.
And I really need that.
Yeah.
If I was set doing one thing, I just wouldn't, there would be no energy input in that at all.
So in your journey of finding voice and identification, it sounds to me like you've learnt also maybe how to manage your neurobiology so that you can do things that maybe take a lot of your energy and maybe are dysregulating to your sensory system and to your neurodivergent being. And, you know, how did you kind of work some of that out about how to balance and how to become more regulated so that you can keep showing up and doing these things?
Yeah, I have quite a quiet life outside of work. So work, and again, I think this is a neurodivergent thing. We hybrid our lives quite a lot, and our work is so stimulating often that we don't see it as work.
Yeah.
And it creates such a fulfilling element to our lives when it's like that. In my free time, it's very quiet. So, you know, I go to bed really early and read. I'm quiet. I'm a quiet person a lot of the time. I don't socialise massively. Because I've done a lot of that with work. I enjoy going to the gym, you know, eating my happy, safe foods. But it's a very quiet life. So I guess I often talk about things offsetting. So I guess I offset a lot with that. But it feels like a life. When I say that, I don't mean that it's a complete contrast to my working life. It's all very in sync. You know, my downtime and my space is integrated into my day. It's a very fluid day with work and my own stuff.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because it holds something very close to my experience of neurodivergence and what I really believe is a growing understanding that we aren't, you know, this kind of static way of being, that we have capabilities, we can shift and change and do things maybe people wouldn't expect us to be doing. So if we're seen as a quiet person, we might not, you know, it might be a surprise to somebody that we're on a podcast or we're doing a live webinar, that it seems incongruent to how people perceive us. But we're dynamic, and when we can learn about our neurobiology and we can balance and offset things, then we can go into those spaces and do those things and grow fuller size. It's when we don't know that about ourselves, or that's not being accepted, that you know, that's a shrinking experience rather than an expanding experience.
Yeah, and I think also it's about when we use that kind of spoons analogy of, you know, what takes our spoons. I think we can do lots of things things that people would assume would take our spoons, but if they're things that we find are part of our work and life that are stimulating and enjoyable, then they're not necessarily going to use up those resources. How, you know, if I had to go, say I just said that was my working day, but that part of that working day was going in and sitting in a school environment or you know, an office, then that would massively drain me. But I'm not doing that. All of it's kind of around my spaces that I enjoy being in most of the time. So
yeah, I could do certain work in a very quiet way and it would be way more draining than doing interest-based work that takes a lot of energy and physicality because it also resources me at the same time. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to people sometimes, and it isn't what people consider to be a quiet space or a resourcing action or task or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I find that quite hard to explain to people.
And we find that very hard to explain about our children.
Oh, yeah.
Because we have that a lot. Well, they managed that. Well, they did that last week. So why can't they, you know, there's a lot of conversations like that.
Yeah, that again, back to that idea of how things should be, the me I should be, and that kind of, that we're consistent, not that we're like in relation and constantly interacting with our environment and ourselves, and therefore dynamic and shifting and changing human beings. So Eliza, we're coming close to the end of our talk, and I had a few final questions I wanted to ask you. So why do you think it's like now is such an important time to talk about your voice, what you talk about, your truth? Why is this an important time for you, would you say?
I think doing the work that I've been doing, I've just got braver over time. It's helped me become braver, that it's okay. You know, I sort of tentatively put my foot out there over the years. Oh, that was okay. Okay, well, I can do a bit more of that. I'll do a bit more. And I don't know, I was talking to someone recently about, you know, reaching this time of kind of middle age and, you know, being a woman middle-aged. It's a very interesting time. It's another massive shift. We're on the precipice of, I suppose, another stage and deciding what that is. And there's also a kind of, I think whenever there's that deciding what the next bit is, I think there's always a looking back as well.
I completely relate to that. And, you know, it also makes me think about, you know, this idea of growing full size and filling all the corners of, you know, the space, and how that's not always received that well. That, you know, relating back to what you were saying before, it's not what people think who we are. So, you know, becoming full size is also about, you know, allowing people to see those different sides of who you are, and they might not like that. They might feel threatened by that. They might prefer you in the smaller, more quiet space that you were in before. So, you know, I think it's more than growing full size. It is brave, like you say, to do that, because it's not always, people think, you know, if you're doing something successfully and being well received, that it's perhaps easy and that everybody's celebrating that, but that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, and I think, you know, we're never at that point where we're just, I don't think we ever shed all of that stuff completely. It's still there, even if it becomes quieter, those voices, they're still there, aren't they? So I think it's still, it's still there for us, I think, even when we do get louder or braver. Especially the stuff around motherhood, I think there's still a bit of me, hopefully that will go completely one day, that I think someone's still going to say, oh, well, that's why no wonder your daughter struggled, if that's, you know, if that's what you are or your experiences. And actually I did some training a few months ago, and I have to say it was a white male psychologist was there, and I did this presentation. It was a kind of overview of my work, and really at the end he didn't talk to me at all. He didn't talk to anyone really, but at the end he said, Eliza Fricker's intergenerational trauma story. And it was really cold, really harsh. Wasn't holding that you know, I just thought, wow, you've just said that.
My whole intergenerational trauma experience.
On stage. Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are still those middle-aged white men with a lanyard who are going to do that in a really unsafe way. They're going to put a synopsis over our whole vulnerable tale, aren't they? They're still there. They're still out there.
Yeah, that leaves me feeling, lots of things.
Yeah.
Very physical reaction to that. Those words should be held with lots of safety and protection.
Yeah.
Shouldn't they? So my final kind of question to you, if you could leave listeners with, you know, maybe one sentence or, I don't know, one truth that you have journeyed through, or still journeying through, that if there is somebody listening to this that has felt alone, is still trying to find their voice, is there anything that you'd like to share or could share? It can just be something that's personal to you about the journey you've been on.
I think for a long time I was fearful of change and being this ever-changing person and changing my mind and being one thing seemingly one day and something another. And I'm much more comfortable with that now. And I often say to families, you know, it's okay to change how you parent tomorrow. That's okay. And so I think allowing that change to come in and to fluctuate, I think that's a big thing. I think that's a big thing to accept about ourselves, because it allows that fluidity to come in rather than thinking, who am I? And trying to make this decision on who we are. And I think also that kind of, you know, as much as social media can be a wonderful space, it's some days I find it an incredibly difficult one. And I think we've got masses of discussions to have still on neurodivergence, and we need to keep that door open. And sometimes I see that door seems a little bit like it shuts on people, neurodivergent people doing it to neurodivergent people too. I'm one of change and uncertainty and flux, and I welcome those things, and I want more people to do that. And I suppose it can be a difficult thing to do that when we don't have that flexible thinking. I think there's a lot going on, isn't there?
I absolutely love that. And I'd say that's really where I am right now, and not apologising for changing my mind or doing something differently or seeming inconsistent. There's still consistency in there. It might seem a little bit chaotic at times to others, but there's definitely some dots joined along that way. Well, thank you so much, Eliza and Gizmo. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Thank you
thanks
for being
for having
our
me.
first guest as well.